Now, what is this?
Well, this is a photograph that Man Ray took of Lee. And in the main shot, she has a head. But here, this is the picture he wanted us to see, so he signed it. And so he sliced her head off.
Is that when she was working with him?
Absolutely, yes. It was shortly after they'd first met. And he'd fallen in love with her.
Well, is that story true?
Which one?
The one where she tried to get to see him and she couldn't. And she was in a cafe, one of the left bank cafes, and coming up the stairs or going up to the second floor, she saw Man Ray.
Yes.
And she went over to him to say hello, and she said to him, "I'm your new student." And he said, "I don't take students, and I'm going on my holiday to the south of France." And she said, "I'm going along with you." Is that accurate?
We believe it's absolutely true, and she told that story on a number of occasions to different people, and in fact it's even written down by her.
Yes.
So I'm certain about the authenticity of that. It's become one of Man Ray's best known images.
Yes.
And it's of Lee. And of course it has that fabulous solarized quality with a dark line around the outside.
But Lee was always a beauty, even when she was growing up in Poughkeepsie.
I think she certainly had something very exciting and beautiful about her looks, and more importantly, at that moment she was very photogenic.
Man Ray was, when I first met him, was really quite impoverished. And he lived in that 2 bis Rue Ferru.
Yeah. Which was cold and uncomfortable, wasn't it?
Except, well, you know the story of it.
No.
That he needed a studio. He decided to go back to Paris. Everybody had fled, and they were all living in Hollywood. And the story, as I remember, he decided he and Julie had never. He had just married Julie, he was going to move back to Paris. And he went on the last voyage of a boat called the Grace.
Yes, the Comte de Grace.
Yes, and Bill Copley decided that he would go with him.
Right.
So Bill went on that trip, and Marcel Duchamp came to say goodbye, bringing a little package. You know the story of the package?
No.
He brought Man Ray a little package, and he said, "When you get to Paris, I want you to make 10 of these."
Yes.
And it was a plaster cast that he had done of the twat of his current love, who was the wife of the Brazilian ambassador to the United States.
Did she know that she'd been turned into a work of art in this way?
That I don't know, but I remember, I got the story because I remember whenever I went to Paris for Macy's, I made a beeline. I learned how to walk from whatever hotel I was staying at, whether it was the Maurice or the Ritz, how to walk across the bridge and go over to Man Ray's studio at 2 bis Rue Ferru. And when I walked by, I picked it up and I said, "Oh, what is this?" And he told me the story of it. And he had 10, and I said, "May I buy one?" And he said, "Of course." So I bought it, and I had just been married, and Mel and I were living in a modest apartment with very, very little money, even though we were achievers in our retail careers. And I had the one sculpture, and the Copleys always, during the Surrealist period, all your friends, all your artistic friends would live with you or stay with you if you had to.
Yes.
Okay. So Jimmy Metcalf, do you remember Jimmy Metcalf?
No, I don't. I never met him.
Jimmy Metcalf lived with the Copleys. He was from California. He lived with the Copleys until he could get started. When they had they lived outside of Paris at Longpont.
Yeah.
It was called Longpont-sur-Orge, but the house was called Longpont. And when he was coming to New York, trying to get a music contract for his compositions. And we were all very young then. I invited him to stay with us. We were just starting out, so there were no children. And my only piece of art was this sculpture I had bought from Man Ray.
This little life cast.
This little painted, it was the painted trot of Marcel's girlfriend.
Had he cast it in plaster or metal or what?
It was probably plaster, I'll tell you. And Marcel had told him to paint it this rust color. And I proudly bought one of them. I remember it was in my living room. We had just been in my living room on the coffee table. And you know, the thing about musicians is they eat a lot and they never go home.
Yes.
And so we were busy opening up cans and soups and everything, turning it into food, till finally they went home. I wake up in the morning, and in my only piece of sculpture at the time, which was the trot, there are 2 cigarette butts burned out, using it as an ashtray.
There's something quite sadistic.
I was so horrified. I call up Marcel Duchamp. I said, "Oh, Marcel," he said, "the most terrible thing has happened to your sculpture." He said, "I'll be right over." Imagine doing that today.
Yes.
I called, "Marcel, I'll be right over." He came over and he laughed and laughed and he said, "I think it improved it." And he wrote on the back of it, and he invented the name Rosmel, calling us Rosmel. And it says, "To Rosmel, affectionons Marcel." So he signed it. That's probably, so this piece of sculpture, this is a funny story, I still have it home. I went to Christie's a few months ago.
Yes.
Did I tell you this?
No.
I go to Christie's a few months ago, and they're having an auction on Surrealist pieces, and it was a big auction. And there, under a glass box, I see the feu de vigne without the cigarette marks on it. There is the feu de vigne without Marcel Duchamp's signature of Man Ray, number 6, and it was going to go for $350,000. And I go home, and I'm the one with the signature. I bought a glass box and put over it, and they sold it.
They sold the one in Sotheby's. I'm sure they did.
They sold it.
Yeah.
And there I am. At least I have Marcel's signature.
You've got the key one, really.
Do you remember his studio in his home?
What? Man Ray's?
Deux bis Rue Ferrou.
Yeah, I remember it very clearly. And I spent a lot of time there because for me as a young person, Man Ray and Juliet was so welcoming.
Yes.
And I would arrive with my school friends, and it was like we were their oldest and closest friends, and they just treated us like adults, and it was so stimulating. I was there with a young photographer, and he took a photograph of Man Ray. His name's Andrew Lanyon. It was a portrait. I held a chessboard up behind Man Ray's head, and Andrew photographed it. And he sent a print to Man Ray, and Man Ray wrote back to Andrew, sort of 16-year-old schoolboy. "This is the portrait of me I like the best." Now, what an amazing validation, what an amazing encouragement to give to a young guy. There was that generosity, wasn't it?
I was staying at the Maurice Hotel, and I learned how to walk from the Maurice on the right bank, across the bridge, find Saint-Sulpice, the church, and then walk around it to Rue Ferrou, and I could find Man Ray's studio.
Saint-Sulpice features a lot in his paintings and photographs, doesn't it?
Yes. And I remember walking over there one night and walking back, and I was saying at the Maurice, I was traveling for Macy's at that time as their boutique buyer, and our allowance wasn't very big. But I asked the Maurice to give me the least expensive room they had, which was usually used for somebody's secretary. But I was on the second floor, living at the end of the corridor where Dali had this great big suite
Salvador Dali.
Yes, Salvador Dali.
Yeah.
And I used to pass him all the time. I came back from Man Ray and Julie, and I walked down the corridor, and there are these tall, skinny models with paintbrushes painting mustaches on the doors of the rooms next to me, which Dali had taken, I guess, for his age. He had the big suite. And I called Man Ray right away. I said, man, you can't believe what's going on in this corridor. I said, these are these tall, thin models with paintbrushes, and they're painting mustaches on the keyholes. And Man Ray said to me, those aren't female models, they're transvestites. And Dali keeps them around him all the time.
What was his interest in them?
How do I know? I never asked Dali.
I was surprised you didn't have an opportunity to ask him over breakfast.
I should have asked Man Ray.
Yeah.
What was his interest in? Well, he was, he used to hold forth there and at the St. Moritz Hotel in New York.
How did we span from the Golden Apple premiere to meeting Man Ray?
Oh, well, Noma and Bill.
Yeah, the Copleys.
The Copleys. When I heard I was going to Paris, I announced that I'm going to Paris for a department store. It was very rare. I said I was coming to Paris, and they said, you must call us when you get to Paris. And they gave me, Bill and Noma, gave me their telephone number, which was Souffrance 6677.
You still remember it?
I still remember it. I finally, after this long, arduous trip, and at that time, Macy's hadn't discovered tourist flights. Okay, so we were sent first class. And I get to Paris, and I do about 8 different countries. I was their fashion stylist, and I would pick unique items to be either brought over and copied or put into their special boutique. And I did about 5 countries, and I got back to Paris. All the other buyers had gone, and I got a little lonely. And I remembered the telephone number. They said to call them, and I called them. It was Souffrance 6677. Bill answers the phone, and I said, I'm the girl that crashed your party that Sidney Janis brought me to. And he said, I hear him say, hey, Noma, it's that girl. I'm going to invite her to dinner. Man Ray likes pretty girls. So I went from the Maurice Hotel, where I was staying, over to their apartment, and that's how the love affair began with Man Ray and Julie.
And so then after that, every time you came through Paris, you had 2 groups of friends to meet, the Copleys and Man Ray.
But it was more than that. We corresponded all the time in letters, which took a long time.
But how did you meet my parents, Lee Miller and Roland Penrose, then? Was that through Man Ray?
Oh, that was through Man Ray.
Right.
No, I'm sorry. That was through Bill. That was through Bill and Noma. But I was there.
You met them through Bill and Noma Copley again?
Oh, yes. Because whenever I got to Paris, I'd call them immediately. And if I went to Longpont for the weekend, but they took me to a breakfast on a Sunday. Your parents were there.
Yes.
And you were there, very well behaved, with your governess.
That's hard to imagine, but I suppose it could have been true for a moment or two.
You were a very proper little boy.
Yes.
With your governess.
Yes.
And then your parents said to please, your mother was a little more aggressive about it. And since I was an American and in the fashion business, and she certainly had been part of it.
She knew fashion.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Well, she was such a great photographer. We stayed in communication. You couldn't telephone because telephones were long and very expensive, and they get interrupted by the waves going over the wires, So everything was really done by letters.
Yeah.
And we corresponded quite a bit. And whenever I went back, I would call them. But My husband did go on other trips, and he was with a rival department store, Bloomingdale's, and I had him look them up. And your mother was crazy about Mel, and that's that. And they had their own friendship.
Did you ever see the painting of the lips?
Yes.
It must have been really spectacular. Went in his studio for a long time, didn't it?
Well, no, Bill had it.
Bill had it, yes.
No, Bill had it at his first show. I mean, in
Hollywood.
In Hollywood.
Yeah.
No, that was in his first. He didn't sell anything from it. He had all the Surrealist artists at his show, and he used to buy one picture from each artist.
Yeah.
So he bought the lips.
That's right.
And then Bill decided later on in life, I don't know what year, but I was there, to sell everything he had.
Yeah.
And he had an auction at Sotheby's.
That's right. Yeah.
And sold all his pictures. Then the lips came up for sale. And there was a big battle for the lips. One was Estee Lauder that wanted to buy it. And the other was one of the Hineses. Jack Hines, I don't know which one of them. And they were bidding against each other.
Yes.
And he lives on the Riviera now, on his boat.
Well, I think it was bought by Niarchos eventually.
Niarchos, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It was Niarchos and Estee Lauder were bidding.
Niarchos head to head with Lauder.
That's right.
That must have been a contest.
Oh, it was.
Now this guy should be very familiar to you.
Well, of course, it's Charlie Chaplin.
How did you acquire the photograph then? Because it's your collection, isn't it?
It's in our collection.
Yeah.
Now, it's an odd thing, and at that time, don't forget, we didn't make huge salaries, but Mel was at Bloomingdale's.
Yes.
And our very close friends years before, and that's another story. It was Julian Levy.
Really?
And Mel came home with this picture, and he said, I dropped in at this art gallery somewhere on 57th Street, and I went through their photographs, and I found this one, which came out of the Julian Levy collection, and he bought it.
Did he buy it from Levy then?
No, he
because
bought
Levy's
it.
gallery would have closed by then.
He bought it from the gallery. I guess Julian must have, either his widow or somebody must have sent in a lot of pictures.
Yes.
And Mel bought this.
What a fantastic stroke of luck.
Yes.
Yeah.
And actually, I remember Lee knew we had it.
Yes.
That she posed him underneath the chandelier. But that's how it came
So
from.
she deliberately positioned him so the light was coming out of his head. Do you think that was a reference to the fact that he had just finished making his film City Lights in that
It could be. But this was done in Switzerland.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I think she had a bit of an affair with Chaplin.
She might have.
Yes, I'm pretty sure
She might have.
And certainly it was at about that time that she met Aziz as well. So poor Man Ray had a lot of competition.
Did she meet Aziz in Switzerland?
She went with him to Switzerland.
No, I thought she met him, or did she meet him in New York?
She met him in Paris because she photographed Aziz's wife, who was called Ninette.
Who was a very beautiful woman.
She was one of the 7 most beautiful women in Paris, and Lee was another of those 7. I never met Aziz. I wished I had.
Well, the story that your mother told me, maybe it was written, but she said, you were going to be born any minute.
Yes.
Okay? and Aziz came, and there was, and I don't know how true this is, and in Egypt, if you walk around the bed 3 times, you can say, I divorce you.
Yes.
And that's what he did.
He stood there, whatever he did, whatever ritual it was, and he divorced her.
So that she could marry your father.
Exactly. And on that very same trip, he brought back from Cairo the painting of her by Picasso, which had been in Cairo all those years during the war.
And he gave it back to her.
Yes.
And it just shows you the tremendous influence, whether indirectly or directly, that your mother had on everybody who came in contact with her.
People around her. Nobody could be indifferent to her, could they?
Nope. Nobody could. Lee Miller was the same as Lady Penrose to us. You know, I loved the telegram when Lee became a lady, the one that Bill Copley sent.
Yes.
That was an old expression from the 20s. It was,
Who was the lady?
It was a vaudeville expression in New York. Who was that lady I saw you out with last night?
That's right. And he sent that to Roland,
Yes.
didn't he? Just after Roland had been knighted. What was it like visiting Farley's? Did you help Lee cook and things like that?
Well, you couldn't talk to Lee unless you stayed in the kitchen.
Right.
I mean, my whole day was spent, Lee would smoke and she would cook and she would talk. But her whole day was spent in the kitchen, and that was her passion at the time. And if you wanted to visit with Lee, you stayed in the kitchen until dinner time.
You were given useful things to do, like cutting up vegetables.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But I remember, Tony, and you turned into a remarkable man.
Thank you.
I came down, I just assumed if I was in London, I'd do the itinerary so I could be there for a weekend. But I remember taking the train down from Lewis and going to Farley Farm, and your father saying to me, "Oh, please come into my studio, I must talk to you." He said, "What am I going to do?" Tony does not want to go to Eton or whatever.
To get a proper education.
That's right. He wants to go to agriculture school. And I said, "Roland, how flattering. For God's sakes, you've brought half of Sussex." I said, "Who's going to take care of it?" I said, "It's the best thing that could have happened." Who wrote 1984?
George Orwell.
George Orwell. His wife's name was, I know.
Sonia.
I remember coming in from the station and going to Farley Farm, and I come in the living room of the cabin, and a woman drops up, and she said, "Hello, my name is Sonia Orwell, and you must be Roz. I know all about you." She said, "You can buy thousands of dollars worth of merchandise for Macy's. When it comes to buying a dress for yourself, you have to go in the fitting room and come out 6 times with the dress on to make sure everyone thought it was the right one."
Was this true?
Yes. Yes. I could pick out hundreds of pieces of merchandise for Macy's, but when it came for myself, I was terribly insecure. So that's what Lee must have told Sonia.
And Lee must have...
Well, she was there outside, but I'd go in 100 times.
Yeah. So she would have been the person you'd have come out and say, "Do I look good in this?"
I remember that was Sonia Orwell.
Sonia was very to the point, wasn't she?
But you know, I sort of researched. She was only married to George 1 year. It was a short,
Yes. People were very unkind about her and said that she married him on his deathbed, to get the money. Well, there wasn't that much
I didn't
money.
think, yes, but I didn't think so.
What she did do was she protected his estate, his rights, from being exploited in ways that he wouldn't have wanted to. And she, I think, was very worthy in that, and a highly intellectual person in her own right. And so, I think he did well with her.
It was a marvelous life. I miss it all. I miss everybody.
It ain't over yet. What about this show? Is this not a marvelous part of it?
What I think is the marvelous part, and you didn't let me finish, is the fact that their son Tony has been able to carry on the tradition of not only his mother and his father, but his mother and father together, and the whole environment that they inspired, and the attraction they had for people.